Welcome back to the Earthy Goodness Kitchen. Today we're creating another flavoursome, eye-catching, but also affordable plant-based meal that you can make using simple supermarket ingredients. We're cooking creamy, lemony cannellini beans with a chorizo style tofu and then some crispy potatoes to go on the side. I've worked as a chef for 7 years, so I'll throw in some cooking tips throughout the video to help you become a better cook. Just a heads up, if my voice sounds a bit rough, it's because I caught COVID about 4 days ago. So I'm not quite 100%, but I am getting there. So let's get started and cook this plant-based meal that's going to cost less than £2 per portion.
We're going to start this recipe how so many recipes start, and that is with 1 white onion. Best way to get the peel off, in my opinion, is to just chop it in half and then it should come off pretty easily. Then to finally chop it, the method I like to use is to do thin cuts towards the root of the onion and just making sure not to cut through the root. The root is what is going to keep the onion together. You're then going to do 2 or 3 cuts on a horizontal through the cuts that you just made towards the root once again. Having a sharp knife here is key. Mine is fairly sharp, but definitely could be sharper if I'm honest. You're now going to simply cut down through the onion and you should get nice little cubes. When the onion starts to wobble, just tip it over and continue chopping. Next, of course, we've got some garlic, the next most common ingredient in recipes. If you've got a large bulb like this, the best way to open it up is to simply push down with your hand, and that should just break it apart for you. I'm going to slice the garlic for a nice mellow flavour. The larger you leave the garlic, the less strong and more sweet the flavour is going to be. So if you wanted a stronger garlicky flavour, you could finely chop it or zest it, and you could also add it in a bit later in the cooking so that it doesn't cook down quite as much. So parsley often comes with some quite big stalks. Today they're not actually too big, but we're not going to waste them. We're going to finely chop them, and they're going to make a really nice start to the sauce. Simply bunch together the stalks and you're just going to run your knife through them, getting them nice and fine. Then with the leaves, the best way to chop these is to bunch them together as tight as possible and then run your knife through them. Onto the start of the show, the courgettes. We're going to top and tail them and then we're going to cut them lengthways down the middle. We're going to use 2 courgettes today and we're going to prepare them in different ways and you'll see why very soon. The first one we're going to cut into half moon shapes on an angle and we want them to be about ½ centimetre thick. Of course, for my American viewers, this is a zucchini for you guys, but I'm sure you could have worked that out. So for my second courgette, we're going to make a beautiful garnish that's going to go on top of the dish. Simply run the peeler down the length of the courgette and you're going to get these beautiful ribbons, which is going to make a lovely fresh salad to go on top of the beans. Once you start to see the seeds in the middle of the courgette, just turn the courgette 90 degrees and keep peeling. You'll now just have the middle of the courgette, which we're going to simply cut into little cubes, and that's going to go in the base of the bean stew. Try to cut them roughly 1 centimetre cubed and keep them roughly the same size, but you don't have to be too precious about it. In this bowl I've got the onion, the garlic and the parsley that's already been chopped, and we're just going to add the zest of 1 lemon, which is going to add a lovely fragrant flavour to the dish. We can now start cooking the creamy courgette and cannellini beans. Start by heating up a heavy base saucepan over a medium heat and get a good glug of olive oil in there. We're actually going to start by caramelising the courgettes that we cut into half moons. Spread them out as evenly as possible so that they're all in surface with the hot pan. We want to get a nice bit of caramelisation on both sides, so it's going to take about 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll take them out and start cooking the other ingredients. We're going to add these courgettes back in at the end so that they don't completely disintegrate during the cooking process and keep a nice little bit of bite to them. Season them with pepper to start with, but don't use any salt, as that's going to draw out all the moisture and they won't get caramelized. Once they have got some caramelization on them, you can add a little salt to season them. We'll now add in the onion, the garlic, the parsley and the lemon zest, and a little bit of extra olive oil if you think your pan needs it. Then the little cubes of courgette that we cut earlier, these we're going to let completely cook down into the dish and they're going to go beautiful, soft and caramelized. Season this with some salt and pepper and let it slowly cook for 10 to 15 minutes. You want to do this really slowly so it slowly draws out the sweetness, the natural sweetness in the courgettes and the onions. A lot of the time of cooking, the key is to be patient and to let everything just slowly cook, and that's where you're going to get the best flavour. I like to use a decent bit of olive oil here so that the onion and the courgette, they almost get confit. Confit means cooked in oil, and it just makes them really soft, caramelized and delicious. To speed up the process a little bit, you can splash a bit of water in and put a lid on, and this will create a nice steamy vacuum for it all to cook in. I'm also going to add the juice of half a lemon to add even more lemony citrus goodness to these beans. So now the courgette and onion are looking beautiful and caramelized, we're going to add in our beans. So I've cooked my own beans here. I've got some lovely cannellini beans. I soaked the dry beans overnight, and then the next day I brought them to a simmer and cooked them for about 1.5 hours, 2 hours. And I've put some nice aromatics in here, so I've got rosemary,
a few bay leaves, and then a couple of peppercorns, and that just adds a really nice flavour to the beans while they're cooking. So canned beans are absolutely fine if you want to use them, but I like to use dried beans as you can save a little bit of extra cash and you can add your own flavourings to them. So I've got the bay leaf and the rosemary in here, but you could add garlic, onion, ginger, coriander seeds. You could literally add whatever you like to them while they're cooking, and that's going to infuse into the beans.
Starting off with just a third of the beans, we'll then get a fork and we're going to give it a good old mash. We're going to mash the courgette and the beans together, and this is going to help create a really creamy sauce. This is a great way of making a really creamy bean dish without actually adding any extra cream. Of course, if you wanted to add a vegan cream, then you could do that as well. Once you've got it all nice and mashed together, we're going to add the rest of the beans and also 200 to 300 ml of the bean water. This has lots of starches in, so it's also going to help thicken the dish and make it nice and creamy. We've got a few other extra ingredients to go into these beans which are going to really elevate the flavour and texture. Starting off with a teaspoon of miso paste. Miso is going to add a lovely salty umami flavour to the beans. Then we're going to go in with some nutritional yeast. That's going to add a nice cheesy nutty note to the beans. Cook your beans on a gentle simmer for around 10 minutes until they're lovely, creamy and rich. We're going to finish them off with the parsley leaves that we chopped. Then those beautiful caramelized courgettes, which are going to still have a nice bite to them and be really flavoursome. Give your beans a taste and then adjust the seasoning. I added some extra olive oil, a little salt and pepper, and then the juice of half a lemon. So your beans are now done, and we're going to crack on with the chorizo style tofu.
For the tofu, you want to use an extra firm tofu. I'm going to be using this Tofu brand that we get here in the UK. It comes in a vat pack, as you can see, like so, not in the water bath like the other ones do. And it's super firm, and it's going to be perfect for this chorizo that we're going to be making.
Starting off, we're going to crumble our tofu into little pieces, roughly 1 centimeter cubed. But don't worry too much, as we're going to add lots of lovely flavourings, and when we mix them in, that's going to break it down further.
So we definitely want to use a smoked paprika, but you can get sweet and you can get really spicy ones. Personally, I prefer to use a sweet one like this one. But if you have more of a spice tolerance, then you can definitely go for one of the spicy smoked paprikas.
To flavour our chorizo style tofu, we're going to start off with some sweet smoked paprika. Then we've got some ground cumin, then just a little splash of red wine vinegar. That's going to add a little acidity to the tofu to balance out the flavours. Then we've got some tomato puree. I've got one in a jar here, which I much prefer to the ones in the tube, because I find you can just never get it all out of the tube. Some onion powder. Mine's gone a bit grainy here because I left the bag slightly open, but it still works perfectly fine. A swig of dark soy sauce, light, would work fine as well. Then a good grinding of black pepper. You don't have to use your hands here, but I just find it is the best way to get all the tofu covered in the delicious marinating ingredients. This would be great to do the night before, but it works perfectly fine just doing it 5-10 minutes before you want to cook it. Heat up your frying pan over a medium-high heat with a tablespoon of oil, and we're going to get that nice and hot. Carefully pour in your tofu, making sure not to accidentally splash yourself with the hot oil, and we're going to let this cook for around 10 to 15 minutes until beautifully golden and crispy. You want to make sure you're not stirring it around too much, or else it won't have time to properly catch on the surface and get nice and crispy. I like to leave it for 2 or 3 minutes, give it a good stir, and then leave it for another 2 to 3 minutes and just repeat the process. Adjust the temperature of the pan depending on how quickly the tofu browns, as you don't want it to burn. The goal here is to almost dehydrate the tofu and make it really nice and crispy. I'm going to add some extra olive oil here, as chorizo is typically very fatty, whereas tofu is not. So we can add extra olive oil, which is a nice healthy alternative to the fat you would be getting from the pork. One tip I've got is to spread the tofu nice and thin across the pan so that it can all get beautifully crispy. So there we have it. We've got the beautiful smoky spiced chorizo style tofu, and that's going to go so beautifully with these creamy white beans. For the final part of this dish, we're going to do some crispy baby potatoes in the air fryer. You could perfectly well do them in the oven if you wanted to. Get some olive oil on them, season them with salt, pepper and oregano, and we're going to cook them for around 25 to 30 minutes until they're crispy on the outside and beautifully soft and fluffy in the inside. So there we have the final dish. We've got the crispy oregano potatoes, and then we've got the creamy lemony beans with the chorizo style tofu. And then I've just dressed the courgette with a little bit of lemon juice, olive oil and parsley.
Right, it's time to give this a taste. I'm very excited. We've got the creamy courgette butter beans, we've got the tofu chorizo, and then we've got a little courgette salad going on there as well. And then on a separate plate, we've got the crispy oregano potatoes to go alongside. Let's try and get a mouthful with a bit of everything going on. That is honestly next level. It's hard to stop eating. There's such a nice contrast between the creamy, lemony, vibrant beans, and then you've got the smoky, umami chorizo, and it just goes together so well. and then you've got a nice bit of extra freshness from the raw courgette. I'm meant to be eating this with my family a bit later on, but I might end up just finishing it right now. I'd say it's really worth cooking your own dried beans, because sometimes with the canned ones they're a bit chalky, especially the cheaper ones, whereas if you cook your own, you can cook them to perfection and you've got lovely buttery cannellini beans here. The great thing about this dish is it's really versatile and you can swap out ingredients for other ones depending on what you have in store or ones that you prefer. For example, with the courgette, you could swap it out with leek, which caramelizes really nicely and goes nice and soft, or you could use some mixed peppers, that would be really nice as well. For the herb, I really like to use parsley, but you could also use chives, you could use coriander, even basil would be really nice actually. For the beans, once again, I'd really recommend cooking your own ones so you can decide how soft you want to cook them and also the different flavors that you add into them. Today I've used cannellini beans, but you could use butter beans or pinto beans. I wouldn't use like black beans or kidney beans as they're likely too strong and wouldn't go so well with the lemony flavors. If you don't have miso, then that's absolutely fine. You could use a little light soy sauce, or even just a little bit of extra salt would be absolutely fine. I just like the extra flavor that miso adds to the dish. When you're cooking the tofu, I like to add just a little bit of maple syrup, and that really helps it get nice and caramelized on top. But it's totally optional, so if you don't want to add any added sugar, then you don't have to do that. I've served this dish with crispy potatoes, but you could do it with spaghetti, pasta, noodles, rice, or even just some sourdough toast to scoop it up, and that would be really delicious, especially for a nice light lunch. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please do hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and also share the video with your friends who are looking to eat more plant-based food, and I'll see you in a video very soon. Bye bye.
Looking for another cheap and healthy meal to cook? Then check this video out.